Weekly today, we talk issues of tax, especially against the background of the recent expose on the Paradise Papers. What is legal and what is not? We ask a leading tax practitioner, Mr. Theo Emuwa. Also on the program, we have details of the Nigerian Bar Association's move to domesticate the Administration of Criminal Justice Act in 28 states of the Federation, plus a recap of the top trending stories from the courts. Hello and welcome to the program. I am Shola Shieli. The president of the Nigerian Senate, Dr. Bukola Saraki, is among 40 politicians who allegedly have offshore accounts hidden away, according to an expose by new investigations which have been dubbed Paradise Papers. The leaked 1.4 terabyte data is said to contain 13.4 million records and is no doubt one of the biggest leaks in history. More than 120 politicians and country leaders in nearly 50 countries, as well as hundreds of business people across the world, were identified in the record as users of onshore entities. These investigations have generated a lot of reactions, and today on the program we look at what's legal in all of this and what's not. Our guest is the former chairman of the Tax Committee of the Nigerian Bar Association's section on business law. Thank you for talking to us.
You're welcome.
Let's start with the likely ramifications or spin-off of this Paradise Papers. What do you think?
Well, there are a number of issues that arise. Some are, technical or legal, but a lot of the reaction has perhaps been more emotional than technical. Let's first of all clarify that having an account in another country is not by itself illegal. Having a business in another country is not by itself illegal. That is why, for example, you have businesses in Nigeria, such as the banks, that have subsidiaries all over the African continent. The reverse is also the case. You have companies from other parts of the world that have businesses and accounts in Nigeria. Nothing illegal in that. It is what you use the accounts or the vehicle for that is of issue. So if the idea behind having that vehicle is to hide income which does not get taxed, then there's a problem. But if the income or monies which go into those accounts or those vehicles has been legally obtained and has been taxed, there really is no other issue to worry about. But I think in many cases, that is not what has happened. The monies in those places have not been properly or fully taxed, and that is perhaps one of the reasons why they were put there in the first place. By way of example, we talk about Paradise Papers and Panama Papers. These are recent examples, but we forget that over the years, other cases of exposure of data have occurred. A few years ago, Swiss banks had what you call secret accounts, which meant that those accounts did not indicate or disclose the owner. So you see a number, but you wouldn't know the name of the owner. And so if you were a tax authority or whoever investigating, you never know who owned those monies. The owner knew what the number was and knew how to get the money out of the account when he needed it. The American government felt, well, it looks like, or they suspected that many of those accounts were held by people who are American citizens and who were therefore liable to tax in America. And they made a case and ultimately forced the Swiss banks, the Swiss government, who then forced the Swiss banks to provide the information that they wanted about American citizens who had such secret accounts. With that information, the American tax authorities were able to say to their citizens, well, you've been filing tax returns in America, and this is the income you've shown us. Now we see you have this amount of money in Switzerland, which doesn't tally with what you've been saying to us in America. So it looks like there is some amount of tax that you haven't paid. And of course, if that is the case, you have very little defense. You will surrender to the authorities and pay the tax due, as well as whatever penalty goes with it.
Nigerian public office holders have a duty to disclose their assets in such offshore accounts. But what's the punishment for failing to disclose?
Well, they have a duty to disclose their assets. And the idea behind that disclosure is so that the assets you declared upon assumption of office can be compared to the assets you declare when you leave office a few years later. And the difference between the two should not exceed whatever your income was during that period. Because if there's a bigger difference, then you would need to explain where that difference came from. And that's what this declaration of assets is about. And my understanding is that you are obliged to declare your assets wherever they are. So if you have property in the UK or in Europe or in America, it's meant to be declared as well. So that if you started off having one house in the UK when you assumed office, and when you leave the office a few years later, you have 3 or 4 houses in the UK, you need to explain how you moved from one house to 4 houses.
If your explanations don't match up, who has the responsibility to make sure that you do the right thing?
No, the taxman's job is to levy tax on the taxpayer. So if he sees that this was your income, he will ask you to pay tax in respect of that income. Simple as that. If you don't pay tax, the tax demanded, then he prosecutes. But if you do then pay the tax, then, together with the penalty involved, then the matter might come to an end.
These disclosures have raised issues of tax evasion and tax avoidance. Maybe you should define these terms for us.
Well, those terms are increasingly being used confusingly. There was a time when the idea was that if you deliberately did not pay the tax you should pay, you were evading tax. Now, the idea then was that